Good morning to all. Uh, Today I'm going to talk on the remaining part of the herpes viridae family. Those are the herpes viruses. The last class we learned about the alpha herpes viridae subfamily. Today we are going to discuss about the members of beta herpes viridae and gamma herpes viridae. So let us have a case scenario in this thing. Uh, a 10-day-old baby presented with jaundice. He was born by normal delivery to a 23-year-old female with normal pregnancy. The mother had no illnesses during her pregnancy, and the mother had no illnesses during her pregnancy and not tobacco or alcohol or drug abuse. No family history of genetic abnormalities. The infant has a mild jaundice with abnormal small head circumference. And CVS is normal, hepatosplenomegaly is present, and the neurological examination notable for the lack of startle response to a loud noise. CT scan of head reveals the intracerebral calcifications. So the examining pediatrician suspected this would be a case related to the viral etiology. So here baby presented with jaundice, and the baby has got the microcephaly and has got the hepatosplenomegaly and a lack of response to loud noises. Startle response means that's a shock-like response followed by the loud noises. This is also lacking here. So this is how the case has been presented in this particular case. So with this, we have to discuss about the important virus, that cytomegalovirus. It's also known as salivary gland virus because the first time it was identified and isolated from the salivary glands or some other secretory glands. So this is the largest virus among all the herpes viruses that belongs to the herpes viridae family, because this virus also causes for the massive enlargement of infected cells. It causes for the massive enlargement of infected cells and infects the kidney and salivary glands. And if you grow these viruses in vitro, they replicate in the human fibroblast cell line cultures and produces the cytopathic effects in the fibroblast, which appearance is described as owl's eye appearance. Now you can see the how this is a fibroblast. This entire thing is a infected fibroblastic cell, and this cell, once this virus is infected with this cell, it shows the big nucleus, and also you can see the big cell also as well. These are all the normal cells. These are all the normal cells. But this is abnormally enlarged cell with with the infected cytomegaloviruses. So that's why it's also known as cytomegalovirus. Viral infection responsible for the enlargement of abnormal enlargement of the cell. That's why it's known as cytomegalovirus. But previous name, the older name for this particular virus is salivary gland virus, because it was isolated from the salivary gland. And the reservoir for this particular virus is human beings. There is no any animal reservoir, and the source is saliva, cervical secretions, semen, and milk. Milk means not from the animal milk, it's mother's milk. Mother's milk will secrete these viruses. So consumption of mother's milk, if the mother is really infected, and then cause the transmission of these viruses. Among all these sources, saliva is the main source of the transmission of this particular virus. And how it would be transmitted? Transmission possible either transplacental route or by means of sexual contact or followed by organ transplantation. If any recipient receives the organs with positivity with this particular cytomegalovirus, because they reside in the B cells of the infected individuals, so through the organs, this particular virus can get transmitted to the recipient, from the donor. So the organ transplantation also will cause for this one. And perinatal and postnatal transmission is possible from the infected mother. And if you see the congenital cytomegalovirus infection, that means is most commonly common presentation of this virus is in the form of congenital cytomegaloviral infection, which is associated with much more complications when compared to the other varieties of presentations. So this congenital cytomegaloviral infection is very much severe if the infection occurs in the first trimester of pregnancy. If the mother infected in the first trimester of pregnancy, this would be very, very severe and serious because it infects the liver and blood forming organs. Liver also, it's a blood forming organ during the neonatal life, and also the bone marrows also. So the liver, bone, blood forming organs and nervous system, all these systems gets involved in the congenital cytomegaloviral infection. And one important point which you have to remember is among all the infected mothers, only 5% of the infected mothers, 5% of the infected mothers will show the congenital cytomegaloviral infections. Otherwise, other people, remaining 95% will not be manifested with full-blown case of clinical manifestations. But only 5% of cases will show the clinical presentation. So the most common presentation is petechial hemorrhages. The petechiae are seen on the face or around the body. If the petechiae are severe in nature, you can see the very big petechial things here. This rashes you can see. See, this is one. These are all the things you can see. And if it occurs in the elderly people or big, little more aged people or individuals or children, then it is known as pityriasis rosea. Pityriasis rosea. But here we can call it as blueberry muffin. They are called blueberry muffins, and the baby which are having this kind of lesions is known as blueberry muffin baby. Blueberry muffin baby. If the baby shows this much big and widespread petechial hemorrhages, and these people also may have the hepatosplenomegaly and jaundice. If you see here the case which I already mentioned in the beginning of this particular topic, I mentioned that the baby is presented with jaundice, hepatosplenomegaly, and microcephaly. So here again, the most common presentation here is in case of cytomegalic inclusion disease is hepatosplenomegaly and jaundice. And if you see the less common presentations, so these are all most common, and less common presentations, microcephaly. This is also present in this baby, and you can see the cerebral calcifications also. I have mentioned about cerebral calcifications also in this particular case scenario. That means a baby who born to otherwise normally considered mother with hepatosplenomegaly, jaundice, microcephaly, and cerebral calcifications, you have to think in terms of herpes viral infections. And not only that, another important and less common presentation with cytomegalic inclusion disease of newborn is prematurity. In 30 to 50% of the babies who born to those infected mothers will show the premature babies, and intrauterine growth retardation also you can see. This is also we have to remember. And mortality is around 20%. The mortality rate is around 20% if the cytomegalovirus infects the baby in utero. So this is about the congenital cytomegaloviral infection, which is very important, either 2 months or short notes question for you in theory. Next one is perinatal cytomegaloviral infection. So in case of perinatal, the name itself will show that perinatal, around the delivery, at the time of delivery or after delivery through the breast milk, the baby get infected. from the infected mother, and the babies get infection. So the transmission in case of perinatal cytomegalovirus infection may occur either followed by the normal delivery. If you allow the mother to go for cesarean section, that problem may not be there. But if you allow the mother to go for normal delivery, this while the baby is coming through the genital tract, the baby may get infection with this virus and cause for the transmission. And after the delivery, even breast milk also, I already mentioned that these viruses present in all the secretory glands, in all the salivary glands and breast and kidneys, in all these areas, these viruses are present. So even breast milk also can secrete these viruses. So consumption of this breast milk from the infected mother may transmit this virus to the baby. And how does perinatal cytomegaloviral infection would be presented? If it is a congenital cytomegalic viral infection, I already mentioned how it is going to be presented. Now, how it will be presented if it occurs to the perinatal transmission? That means after delivery and after birth, if the baby infected, how it will be presented? Remember, most of the times these infections are asymptomatic. Most of the times they are asymptomatic. And they shed an urine up to years. That's why in the newborn babies, the best sample to diagnose the cytomegalovirus infection is the urine. Urine is the best sample. And if you see among the premature babies, among the premature babies, the commonest presentation is a dreadful condition, that is interstitial pneumonitis. The interstitium of alveoli, it's inflamed and infiltrated with many number of acute inflammatory cells. That is responsible for death of an individual, death of babies. Yeah, nice guy. I could see that. I think it might be in what we call in shady. What is this? It's covering with something. Okay, nice. So the presentation most of the times among the premature babies, it would be seen in the form of interstitial pneumonitis. So this is the way how the baby will present in case of cytomegaloviral infections. If the baby infected after delivery or during the delivery. Next, how this cytomegaloviral infection will manifest in among the people who are immunologically compromised. Immunologically compromised means that people who are on treatment for the cancerous conditions or post-transplantation times, or people who are suffering with the HIV or any other secondary immunodeficiency conditions, or any primary immunodeficiency conditions. In all these conditions, the immunocompromised state will exist among the individuals. So the people who are suffering with immunocompromised state, that means where the immunological functions are compromised, and there, especially in case of AIDS, it will be seen in the form of chorioretinitis. This is the commonest presentation among the AIDS patients. Among the AIDS patient, the cytomegaloviral infections will be manifested commonly in the form of chorioretinitis associated with eye and eyeball and its structures. Then gastroenteritis and dementia. Gastroenteritis also possible, and dementia, that's because of the atrophy of the brain tissue results in dementia. And the next important thing to remember is organ transplantation recipient. The people who received organ transplantation, 1 to 4 months after transplantation, the cytomegaloviral infections will manifest in the form of bilateral interstitial pneumonia. This is the most common presentation. Bilateral interstitial pneumonia, either in the babies or in the people with immunocompromised individuals. It's present in the form of bilateral interstitial pneumonia. And another thing is febrile leukopenia. That means decreased WBC count followed by episodes of fever. People will suffer with this. And resection of renal allografts. If any grafts have done, they also will be rejected by even after 4 months also, followed by this cytomegaloviral infections. And now we will see the lab diagnosis of this particular viral infection. The samples to be collected are, most important sample is urine. You have to collect the urine to process it, or you can go for bronchoalveolar lavages also. But most of the times we prefer urine to collect because it can be secreted. This virus can be secreted especially in the childhood for the so many years. So the samples to be collected urine, and centrifuge the sample and subject it for microscopy. In this microscopy, you can see the cells with Ohl's eye appearance. See this how the infected cells will appear. So this is another infected cell. These are all normal cells. These are all normal cells, and here also these are all normal cells. These are all the normal cells. But these are all the infected cells. I think you can imagine how they appear. Ohl's eye appearance. Ohl's eye appearance, and this kind of cells are seen if you collect the urine from the infected individuals, centrifuge, and just if you see under the microscope without, with the staining. Usually we do the GMSR stain, or you can go for gram stain also, but usually we do either GMSR stain, right stain, or at least we have to do with this hematoxylin and eosin stain. So by doing this test, a staining test, and if you see at the microscope, this is a very simple test to diagnose the cytomegaloviral infection among the children, among the infants and children, and more reliable also. Not only commonly being done, but more reliable test also. And another thing is, this is about microscopy. And next one is culture. Because these are all cultivable viruses, we can do culture in the human fibroblast cell lines. We can do culture in the human fibroblast cell line cell lines. The incubation period is around 2 to 3 weeks. Remember, just like the alpha herpes, when the members of alpha herpes viridae, these are not fast growers. These are not fast growers. Those are the members of alpha herpes viridae, like herpes simplex virus 1, herpes simplex virus 2, and human herpes virus 3, otherwise called varicella zoster virus. All these 3 viruses are rapid growers. Within 1 to 2 days, you can see the cytopathic effects in the cell line cultures. But these members of beta herpes viridae, that is cytomegalovirus, are slow growers, and they will grow on human fibroblast cell line cultures after 2 to 3 weeks. After 2 to 3 weeks, again you can see multinucleated germ cells with the cell enlargement. This is the fibroblast, which already I have shown you. It's the fibroblast. See how the fibroblasts have been enlarged with the Ohl's eye appearance, like intranuclear inclusion bodies. And another important technique is shell-wild technique. The purpose of listen carefully here. Since these cell line cultures will take a lot of time to see the cytopathic effects, so to see the cytopathic effects, to reduce the duration of, to observe the cytopathic effects, we have to do this shell-wild technique. That means by doing this shell-wild technique, you can see the cytopathic effects in cell line cultures by within 1 week, around 1 week time, we can see the cytopathic effects in these cell line cultures. Now we will see how it has to be done. See here, this is, let me take another pen because I'll take this pen. Yeah, here this is the urine sample collected from the patient. This is urine sample, right? This is the urine sample in the vial, and through this syringe we have to inoculate fibroblast cell line cultures. Fibroblast cell line cultures has to be inoculated into this urine tube. Once you collected the urine, this is urine. Into this, the cell line culture has to be inoculated. Once you inoculate it, put it in the centrifuge. Put it in the centrifuge and do the centrifugation. So why you have to do the centrifugation? If you do the centrifugation after mixing the urine sample with the cell line cultures, this is cell line culture and this is urine sample. What will happen is the time taken for inoculation of the virus into the cell line cultures will be decreased. So the virus which are present in the urine sample will get attached to the cell line cultures very early. So once these virus get attached to the cell line culture or cell lines, cells present in the cell line cultures, then the cytopathic effects will be shown early, right? The cytopathic effects will be shown early. So once you centrifuge this, inoculate it again the 37 degrees centigrade or at like body temperature inoculation, and inoculate it for just for 1 or 2 days or maximum 1 week. Then with this contents, make a smear like this, make a smear, and this smear has to be stained with fluorescent dye. Stain with fluorescent dye and see under the fluorescent microscope. Fluorescent microscope. Any cytopathic effects which are occurring in this particular cell line cultures will be shown on this one, and after staining we can see under the immunofluorescent microscope. You may ask why not the normal microscope, but you all know that fluorescent microscope has got more sensitivity when compared to the normal microscopic method. That's why here this shell wire technique will increase or to reduce the incubation period to see the cytopathic effects. I hope you understand, otherwise once again I'll repeat it. So the urine sample has to be collected. So the urine sample has to be collected and mixed with the cell line cultures and centrifuge it. And once the centrifuge and incubate it for some time, minimum 2 to 3 days we have to incubate. After that, from here you have to prepare the smear like this, and this smear has to be stained with fluorescent dye. After staining, this has to be seen under the fluorescent microscope, right? That means not only the fluorescent dye tagged with monoclonal antibodies of this particular virus. Remember this particular point. So the monoclonal antibodies which are tagged with the fluorescent dye has to be used, because these viruses are antigens. So the dye directly won't get attached to the antigens. So the antibodies which are tagged with the fluorescent dye has to be used to stain this virus. So you can see like this under the microscope. So this is called what we call shell wire technique, and this is more useful technique for early visualization of cytopathic effects among the infected cells. Now, antibody detection. Anyhow, we can go for the antibody detection. IgM appear within 1 to 2 weeks after the infection, and IgG appears few days after. That means around 10 to 15 days after the infection, you can see the IgG. Whereas within 1 week, usually in 1 week, just 7 days, we can see the IgM antibodies. Right. Then antigen detection. This antigen is specifically against the specific antigen, that is PP65 antigen. So the CMV specific PP65 antigen from the peripheral WBCs by using the immunofluorescent technique. I think, I hope you are not confused. So antigen, how to be detected? The antigens of this viruses from the infected viruses, from the infected individuals, have to be demonstrated from the peripheral WBCs. we have to collect the peripheral WBCs, and these peripheral WBCs have to be treated with monoclonal antibodies tagged with immunofluorescent dye. I hope you understand what is tagging. Monoclonal antibodies will be tagged with immunofluorescent dye. So the peripheral blood smear, just nutshell to say, peripheral blood smear has to be treated or stained with the monoclonal antibodies tagged with immunofluorescent dye. If these peripheral WBCs infected this particular cytomegalovirus, these monoclonal antibodies are specific against this particular PP65 antigen. So if the WBCs are infected with cytomegalovirus, these antibodies gets attached to this particular PP65 antigen. Because of the immunofluorescent dye present attached to this monoclonal antibodies, these PP65 antigens will glow. So those will be seen under the immunofluorescent microscope. This is how we can demonstrate. Another important method is PCR. PCR for cytomegalovirus DNA detection. Treatment. Now we will go for the treatment. So remember, so far for the herpes viruses, the drug of choice was acyclovir. Here remember, no use at all with the acyclovir. Acyclovir is no use at all for cytomegaloviral infections. The main reason for this is cytomegaloviruses are lacking thymidine kinase enzyme. So the thymidine kinase enzyme is useful for the replication of the DNA in the viruses, in the herpes viruses. Whereas cytomegaloviruses are lacking the thymidine kinase. So this acyclovir, the active form of acyclovir is acyclovir triphosphate. Acyclovir will be converted to acyclovir triphosphate, which will inhibit the DNA replication. So once this thymidine kinase is lacking, be careful and listen carefully. Once this thymidine kinase is lacking in the cytomegalovirus, this acyclovir will not be converted into acyclovir triphosphate. Once it's not converted to the acyclovir triphosphate, which is the active form of acyclovir drug, this drug won't act on the cytomegalovirus. Is it clear? Right. So, because of a lack of thymidine kinase among the cytomegaloviruses, acyclovir is not useful. Just remember at least this particular point. And then, ganciclovir is the drug of choice for cytomegalovirus. Why? Because this ganciclovir will cause for the formation of ganciclovir triphosphate, which can inhibit the viral DNA. This ganciclovir, independent of thymidine kinase enzyme. Acyclovir is dependent on thymidine kinase enzyme. If there is no thymidine kinase enzyme among the viruses, the drug will not be converted to acyclovir triphosphate. But ganciclovir get converted into ganciclovir triphosphate without the presence of thymidine kinase in the virus. Yes, that's the reason why ganciclovir is a drug of choice. Ganciclovir is why ganciclovir is a drug of choice for cytomegaloviral infection is the reason is ganciclovir is not dependent on thymidine kinase enzyme, right? Okay. Somebody is raising their hand. There is no possibility for that. If you have any doubt, please put it in the chat box. Put it in the chat box, I'll answer for any query you have. I can answer for that. Okay. Now put it in the chat box. No query? Okay. We will give some time for anyhow. Next one is foscarnet. If the ganciclovir is resistant, then we have to go for the foscarnet. This foscarnet, of course, used even for the acyclovir resistant cases also, you know. And remaining next thing is cytomegaloviral immunoglobulins. These are considered for the transplant recipients. Not only bone marrow, any transplant recipient cases, we can give the cytomegaloviral immunoglobulins if the donor is positive for cytomegaloviral infections, right? Then cidofovir, it can be given, but it's highly toxic drug. This is especially nephrotoxic drug. That's why we are not using. Mostly we are using ganciclovir or foscarnet. Right? This is the treatment for these particular organisms. Next one is, next important virus is, first we'll have the case scenario, then we'll go for it. A 17-year-old female is brought to the medical OPD with a sore throat and fever since 1 week. She has extreme fatigue and confined to bed for last 3 days. She is not on any medications. On examination, body temperature was 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit and markedly enlarged erythematous tonsils covered with white exudates. She has prominent cervical lymphadenopathy with mild tenderness. CVS is normal. No abnormality detected in the abdomen. Amoxicillin treatment was started, assuming this as streptococcal pharyngitis. A rapid streptococcal antigen test was negative. Streptococcal antigen test was negative. And 2 days later, she complained about red rash from head to toe. From head to toe, red rash was seen after the initiation of amoxicillin drug. So these are the clinical manifestations what we coming across from this particular 17-year-old female who was brought to the medical OPD with a severe sore throat, cervical lymphadenopathy and fever. And they started the amoxicillin drug thinking that it would be a case of streptococcal sore throat, but rather than relieving from the symptoms, now the patient is suffering with rash all over the body. With this particular background, let us see what would be the virus from this particular family responsible for this type of clinical manifestations. That is Epstein-Barr virus. Common culprit for this condition is Epstein-Barr virus, which is a member of gamma herpes virinae, and first time identified in 1964 from a case of Burkitt's lymphoma. The first time it was identified from this. This is most common in early childhood and late adolescence. This virus infection is very common in the early childhood. Why? I'll tell you later. Because of handling by so many people. Because the babies will be handled by so many infected individuals who are most of the times asymptomatic. But late adolescence, that is because of active sexual life. Because of the actual sexual life, this is very common in the late adolescence and also very common in the early childhood from the infected individuals. And next one is, these infections are seen all parts of the world with a 90% seropositivity in adults. Seropositivity means the individuals will show the positive for IgM and IgG antibodies, or at least IgG antibodies, without any proper symptomatology. Symptoms may not be there, but the people will show the IgG antibodies. And the source is oropharyngeal secretions. Remember, I am not telling oropharyngeal droplets or oropharyngeal aerosols. I am talking about oropharyngeal secretions. That means transmission of large quantities of oropharyngeal secretions from the infected individuals are required to transmit this virus. Remember, that's why the transmission is possible because of the prolonged oral contact, which is possible by wet kissing, or simply say French kissing. This kind of kissing will transmit the these salivary secretions from the individual to the other individuals in large quantities, which results in this kind of viral infection. Remember, the mode of transmission for Epstein-Barr virus is not droplets, not aerosols. These are all pure secretions from the oropharyngeal area. Remember this one. And next, pathogenesis. On entry, this viruses has got the receptors on B cells like CD21 and CR2. These are the two important receptors present on the B cells, on the pharyngeal epithelial cells, and by attaching to these particular receptors on the B cells, they enters into the, they infect the B lymphocytes, they undergo for the latent phase. Immediately they can't produce anything, they undergo for the latent phase without completing the replication cycle. So they won't complete the replication cycle, they undergo for the latent phase. And majority of the infected cells will be eliminated and few cells remain for life. Few infected cells will remain for lifetime, which gets reactivated and produce the clinical manifestations. Sometimes they may not be able to produce the clinical manifestations. Simply they shed the viruses through their oropharyngeal secretions. These oropharyngeal secretions, because of the kissing of the babies by the elderly people, the adults or adolescents, can cause for the transmission of this virus from those infected individuals to the small babies. So any unknown persons, we don't know that, because the asymptomatology is very common. Asymptomatology is very common among those infected individuals. That's why these viruses can simply through the oropharyngeal secretions transmitted to the baby and produces the infections. And now if you see, once the B cells get infected, they get proliferated, and abnormal proliferation of B lymphocytes results in the formation of heterophil antibodies, responsible for proliferation of heterophil antibodies. I think you know what is the heterophil antibody. And if you understand the heterophil antigen, you can tell about the heterophil antigen, antibody. So the heterophil antigen means the antigenic cross reactivity between the kingdom, species, or members. So here if you see the antibody, this kind of antibody, B cells produce certain kinds of antibodies followed by this viral infection. Those antibodies will get agglutinated with sheep RBCs or horse RBCs. Means here the sheep RBCs or horse RBCs are acting like antigens. So here how the antibodies are formed? Antibodies are formed against the Epstein-Barr virus. So if there is no any cross reactivity, or if the real antibodies, those antibodies have to combine with only Epstein-Barr viral antigens. But here what is happening? The antibodies produced against this particular virus are combining with antigens of sheep and horse. That's why this antibody is known as heterophil antibody. So this B cell proliferation not only proliferate and produce heterophil antibodies, but also T cell gets activated. The T cell activation results in atypical lymphocyte formation. Atypical lymphocyte formation, where you can see the big nucleus with marginal chromatin. I will show you in the next photographs, and that particular photographs also in the slides. And then you can see the enlargement of liver, spleen, and lymph nodes. And then we'll go to what are the clinical manifestations produced by this virus. It's the most important thing is infectious mononucleosis. It's also known as glandular disease, otherwise called kissing disease. And young adults in developed countries are more commonly affected, and where you can see the fever, malaise, headache, and pharyngitis, and you can see severe cervical lymphadenopathy. And here you can see, which I already mentioned, tonsillar area gets involved with white patches on the tonsillar area. See the entire pharyngeal wall involved, and you can see the white patches on this one on the tonsillar area. Not only that, you can see the maculopapular rash followed by the ampicillin. See, this is a maculopapular rash. How the rash is appearing on the body. This kind of rash is appearing followed by the antibiotic usage, and people may suffer with hepatosplenomegaly also. These are the typical clinical manifestations of what is this called infectious mononucleosis. Then another important thing is hairy leukoplakia. Here, hyperproliferation of lingual epithelial cells. the tongue epithelial cells will get proliferated and forms the white patch on the tongue. This is known as hairy leukoplakia, which is common among the AIDS patients. So among the AIDS patients, this virus will cause for the hyperproliferation of lingual epithelial cells, results in this white colored patch. This is known as hairy leukoplakia. Then, what other malignancies associated with Epstein-Barr virus? First and foremost thing is, Burkitt's lymphoma, and which is a tumor of jaw in children and also young adults. See the tumor of jaw in children and young adults, which is common among the African children. This is very, very common among the African children, and this infection with falciparum malaria or HIV infection will stimulate this Epstein-Barr virus to get attached to the cells. So the viral replication will occur. That means anybody who are having this Epstein-Barr virus already in their body without any symptoms, if they infected with falciparum malaria or HIV, the activation will occur in this Epstein-Barr virus and results in this kind of lymphomas. Very common among the children in the African countries. Remember this. This baby also a baby from Africa. And then another thing is nasopharyngeal carcinoma. This nasopharyngeal carcinoma very common among the people who consume the salted fish because they consist of nitrosamines. And the people who receive the herbal snuff, which consists of 4-ball ester. Main ingredient is a 4-ball ester, and these are all where the people who consume these particular two substances will commonly suffer with nasopharyngeal carcinoma. The regular habit, the people who are having this kind of thing is Chinese people. So this nasopharyngeal carcinoma is also common among the Chinese. Now you can see this now that appears on the endoscopic picture. This is the location of the nasopharyngeal carcinoma on the schematic diagram. But this is how you can see an endoscopic examination of this nasopharyngeal area. Next one is Hodgkin's lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma also seen. This Hodgkin's lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's, here you can see enlargement of lymph nodes. See the enlargement of cervical lymph nodes. Here also this entire thing is enlargement of lymph node. This is also enlargement of lymph nodes. I think you can appreciate the enlargement of lymph nodes here. Remember, this is painless enlargement of lymph nodes, cervical lymph nodes. Painless enlargement of cervical lymph nodes. And this is PET scan. This proton emission transmission electron microscope transmission. This is just like your CT scan and proton emission tomography. That is PET scan. Proton emission transmission, tomographic scan. In this PET scan, you can see the enlarged lymph nodes as dark colored lesions. See, these are all the enlargement of lymph nodes in the entire body. That is possible only by PET scan. We have CT scan, we have MRI scan, and last one is proton emission tomographic scan. This is a radioactive substance where you use to do this particular thing. So this is a PET scan appearance of the person who is suffering with Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And next one is chronic fatigue syndrome. So this is a very important thing to remember. Most of the people in the adolescent age who are suffering with the clinical manifestations, they may not suffer much about all other things. They usually may suffer with chronic fatigue syndrome, unusual tiredness. You can see unusual tiredness among the children. Next one is lab diagnosis. Here you can see the atypical lymphocytosis, and 70% of the total WBCs will be converted into atypical lymphocytes. So you can see this lymphocyte, how it's enlarged and a very big nucleus inside, and inside the outer to the nucleus you can see the light blue colored cytoplasm, and these cells are typically attracts the RBCs. See how the RBCs are attracted by this particular cell and encircled around this particular cell. So these type of cells are known as Downey cells. They are known as Downey cells because the person Downey identified these cells. That's why they are known as Downey cells. And this Downey cells is a typical of this particular viral infections where you can see in the peripheral sphere. And next important test is Pal-Bernal test, which is a tube agglutination test and heterophil antibody detection test. Here what to do is serial dilution of inactivated serum. Inactivated serum, the serum which kept at 56 degrees centigrade broth for 8 hours, the complement will be lysed. Once the complement is lysed, that particular serum is known as inactivated serum. That has to be mixed with 1% RBC suspension equal volume and keep it at 37 degrees centigrade for 4 hours and see the agglutination if it is more than 1 in 256 dilutions. If the dilution is more than 1 in 256 dilutions, then test would be considered as positive. And one more important point to remember, it's not a specific test. False positives are common and heterophil antibodies will be maximum in 3rd week after the infection and disappear by 3rd month. So if you do the test before 3 weeks after infection and if you do the test after 3 months after infection, that test becomes negative, right? Test may becomes negative. And usually it's negative in less than 5 years children and elderly people. In the elderly people and less than 5 years children, it will be negative. So these are the problems with this. And one is commercially available slide agglutination test also available. This is tube agglutination test, right? Pal-Bernal test is tube agglutination. But the same principle involved in monospot test, which is slide agglutination test. Then, serological test, antibodies for the viral capsid antigen. IgM indicates current infection, IgG past infection or immunity. Antibodies for nuclear antigen also have to be detected, which indicates always past infection. That's why always we have to go for the antibody detection against viral capsid antigen, not against viral nuclear antigen. Okay, antibodies against the nucleus is not reliable, but antibodies against the viral capsid are reliable to detect or to diagnose this particular condition. And anyhow, detection of Epstein-Barr viral DNA by PCR or by RT-PCR is another, of course, gold standard test to diagnose this particular condition. Treatment, we have to give analgesics, acyclovir, and also antibody to CD20 receptors or B cell, that is rituximab. This is the drug. This rituximab can be given, but this is a very costly drug. It's not that much easily available. Anyhow, that is the drug which is available. Usually, we use acyclovir as the drug of choice for this particular infections. And next one is human herpes virus 6 and 7. Human herpes, here it's not showing here. Human herpes virus 6 and 7. Here in this 6 and 7, this first time isolated in 1986 from AIDS patient. And it infects the T lymphocytes. Remember, it infects the T lymphocyte by binding to CD46 receptors and make the people more vulnerable for HIV individuals. So, if there is any co-infection is there with this particular virus among the HIV infected individuals, the infectivity rate will be more. The infectivity rate will be more. The people who are already infected with human herpes virus 6 and 7 are more vulnerable for HIV infection. That we have to understand. And replicates in the salivary glands and secreted in saliva. And clinical presentation is roseola infantum, otherwise called exanthema subitum. See the roseola, how the rash is appearing. It's associated with the high-grade fever and skin rashes. This is very common among the children. This is very, very common among the children with high-grade fever and skin rashes are seen. Not only that, even fontanella also can't be closed. And the human herpes virus 7 associated fevers, seizures, and pityriasis rosea. So these are all big these things. These are called pityriasis rosea. And human herpes virus 8 discovered in 1994. This Kaposi's sarcoma it produces belongs to gamma herpes viridae. Remember, it infects B cells, whereas those infected with 6 and 7 infects the T cells, but whereas this is B cells. And high prevalence in Africa and low prevalence in North America, Asia, Northern Europe. And transmission, same, homosexual men, organ transplantation, drug abuse, and blood transfusions. And disease manifestations among immunocompromised individuals, it produces Kaposi sarcoma. And this is a soft tissue sarcoma of vascular origin. See, this is how it is appearing here. It is soft tissue sarcoma of vascular origin, appears like red to purple color growth. And not only that, it also responsible for primary effusion lymphomas, that is body cavity lymphomas are common, and lymphoproliferative disorder also common, which is known as Castleman's disease. That means lymphoproliferation is very common disorder for the B lymphocytes. Immunocompetent individuals simply suffer with fever and rash. Normal individuals will suffer with fever and rash, whereas HIV or immunocompromised individuals suffers with all these kinds of things. And treatment, the response to foscarnet, ganciclovir, and cidofovir drugs. And this is about the human, beta herpes virinae and gamma herpes virinae. And thank you very much. And